Good. Yeah, I think we're ready. Just don't want this to disappear. That's fine.
Cool. I shared a Google Drive with you. That has the photos. You can get through that.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's great. Because what we'll do is I'll talk to the guys at CFAP and we'll see either doing a page on Facebook or sorry on LinkedIn, just the most appropriate way for the program. And yeah, it means that we can begin creating the story early next year.
Yeah. Oh, very good.
So
So
people
start moving in now.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, that's it's not the best aircon in that, is it? We're lucky to have like this beautiful room. Yeah, yeah. So, Tony, I know you're interested in animation. If you feel at the end there's going to be like about 3 questions.
Okay.
Small time. Yeah, no, but it's just an opportunity, like a great opportunity to ask some questions about following your story.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's just a sensational opportunity that you hopefully get to revisit.
Yeah.
But yeah, just think about that.
Oh, good suggestion.
All right, team, this is it. Want to grab this one? And just coming online. So this is kind of the end of our story for this week. We hope that you've had a great time with us. It's going to take another shape next year. And I really think that this is such a great opportunity for you guys. We're delighted that you all contributed so much in these last few days. We're really looking forward to the future and navigating these pathways together. We are also very lucky to have the interest and support of these international guests who are going to be also trainers of you. So it's a great opportunity to get to know both of them. Hawk is from Norway in Europe. Ralph is from San Francisco in USA. They both stayed up early and late to even be part of this. So yeah, I just hope you enjoy the chat. They're going to be talking about how they followed their story. And afterwards there will be an opportunity to ask some questions. If you'd like to ask those questions around whatever you like, but particularly about how they navigated their pathways, I think it might be relevant to you. So all good. I'll just wait for them to come online. Is BD coming?
Yeah, they said they were coming.
I might go and get them now, because then we've got everyone in the room and everyone's focused when they come online. Okay, they're here, but they're not in this. See over here. Right. Okay, perfect. No worries. Thank you. Just coming across now. Thank you, and more welcome to everyone. We're just lining up two international time zones here, but everyone is set and ready to go. Oh, wonderful. As promised. Okay, all
right.
Here, I'll just admit, thanks for that. Just got to get that back. Great.
And I
Perfect.
think
Just waiting. Ralph's video, I think, is just starting.
there we go.
Wonderful. And I'll let this camera off. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. And for the class of 2023, it's my great pleasure to introduce you both, but also in the context of our program, the Follow the Story program, which is just concluding its orientation week. The Follow Your Story program is basically a digital pathway program that is designed to help elevate the voice of our participants, a wonderful cohort of 10 creatives who you can see here, just finishing their first 3 days.
today has been an industry day, and next year we will resume on the 15th of January, where in this 12-week program, we'll basically invite and show different pathways within digital industries. So I'd like to hand over now to Hawk to introduce Ralph. Hawk is a collaborator of this program. He's a proud partner and has been here since day one, and representing today PIXAR, which is an augmented reality production company. I'll hand over to you, Hawk, to do the further introductions, but we're thrilled that you can be part of this to discuss how you followed your story into new and exciting digital industries. Over to you.
Sure. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be able to share some thoughts and ideas, and hopefully also we can have a Q&A at the end of this presentation or conversation, I should like to say. There is a bit of an echo, Gareth. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but
it could be just feedback through our camera here, but it's okay from our end if you're okay to proceed.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So basically, I would maybe we could try to do something with the.
That's better.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So yeah. So basically, I'm also very happy to have Ralph Guggenheim here, and he has a super interesting journey that he has gone through in his life, starting in the early days, New York, right, as an engineer kind of thing, and then migrating into this landscape of storytelling. And I think that what I would simply suggest is, Ralph, if you could sort of share. I'm very fascinated by how you started in your career, and how you evolved, into the creative side of things, and not just looking at nuts and bolts and stuff like that. So maybe we can start there.
Sure, no problem. First of all, Gareth, nice to meet you and everyone in the course, the class here. Terrific. Great to make your acquaintance. I hope to get to know you better in the coming months. I got interested in filmmaking first and technology second. So back when I was in high school, I got together with a few friends, one of whom had an old 16mm camera, and after school we would make some films together, piece them together and show them around, and it was a lot of fun. And when I went to university, I went in as a what we call a liberal arts major here in the U.S., studying arts and sciences, humanities, and I was very interested in what I was doing, but I was not satisfied with the coursework, and ultimately chose to do something that I recalled as being fun, which was making films. And so I decided to become to set my major course of study in film, and managed to take a lot of courses in that area and started making more films, and got very interested in animation. And unfortunately, I'm not much of an artist, so I can't draw very well. But in doing some little films that were somewhat animated in various techniques, I started reading more about animation, and learned that at that time, quite some time ago, this was the early days of what was soon to be called computer animation. And that really struck my fancy. I thought, this is terrific. If computers can do all the work and do all the drawing, my life would be a lot easier. I was, of course, wrong, and it's no different today than it was then. It takes great artists to make any kind of animation, computer or otherwise. But it led me into studying more about computer science and computer programming. This was before the days when one could buy an animation package of software, animation software off the shelf and start making films. You had to write your own software. And by virtue of that, I became a software engineer, and went on to, I got degrees at the university in both filmmaking and then later on in computer science. That led me to a job in New York where I was working at a computer research lab that was working on computer animation. And we were making television commercials and working towards what we thought would be, and what we hoped would be, the first fully computer animated feature film. This was around 1978, 79. And lo and behold, when about a year after I arrived there, or less, 6 months after I arrived there, I got a phone call from someone at Lucasfilm, George Lucas's company, saying that George Lucas wanted to start a computer research group to help modernize the tools used in the film industry. And would I know of anybody who's doing animation on computers and would be interested in this? And of course, we were all very interested in this. Star Wars, the first Star Wars movie had come out about a year and a half earlier. And as a result, about 5 or 6 of us migrated from New York to San Francisco, California, to form a computer research group at Lucasfilm. We were working on 3 major projects there. I was in charge of a project to help do film editing on computers, what today you would do with iMovie or with Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro. But in those days, there was no software to do that. We had to write our own software to accomplish that. Another group was involved in, I was doing film editing. They were doing sound editing and sound mixing. And then a third group was doing work on, of course, being that we were at Lucasfilm, working on visual effects for movies and how we could use computers to do visual effects. This was very cutting edge work at that time. Nobody had really thought about doing this sort of thing. And in fact, we ended up producing one scene out of one of the Star Trek movies. And that was considered like a groundbreaking thing. And it took maybe 6 or 8 months to do a 30-second scene out of a movie. It was very laborious. Today, these things are so much faster and easier. The quality and the sophistication of software is tremendous. We ended up commercializing the editing system that I worked on, and I really wanted to get back to making films. And so I joined this visual effects group, and we ultimately left PIXAR. We left Lucasfilm, pardon me, and formed a company called PIXAR with money from Steve Jobs, who founded Apple, and who was really interested in the computer hardware we developed for doing visual effects. He was not that interested in animation yet. But over time, he came to see that the animation business that we were doing was quite interesting. And we started winning awards, and ultimately we won an Academy Award for a short film we made. That led us to a discussion with Disney, who we had a lot of close ties with. And we had a director, John Lasseter, working with us, who had been an animator at Disney. And so I found that I still couldn't draw. I was not the greatest animator in the world compared to some of the people I was working with, nor was I the best computer scientist in the world compared to some of the people I was working with. But what I was good at was I could talk to people who did both jobs because I had done both jobs. And I knew a lot about filmmaking. Many of the people I worked with had never really picked up a camera and shot a film, believe it or not. They were great computer scientists. They knew all kinds of algorithms. They wanted to make computer generated films, but they had never really just done the basics of filmmaking. I had done all that, and I realized that my goal or my trajectory was to be a producer and not an animator and not a technical artist. Over time, and after we won this Academy Award, we started discussions with Disney about making a computer animated feature-length film. We pitched an idea, a story about 2 toys who can't get along with each other. And the film, directed by John Lasseter, was Toy Story. And it took us about 4 years to make, and was the first, and we finally did accomplish the first ever feature-length computer animated film. And it was an exciting accomplishment, and some great people to work with. And there were about 120 of us who made that film at the time. If you went to PIXAR today, you'd find there's 300, 400 people working on a film at any given time. So you have to ask yourself, if computers have gotten so much faster over the last 25 years since we made Toy Story, why does it take 300 people compared to 120 people? And the answer is, it's still a domain of people with artistic vision and the ability to tell good stories. That's really what it's all about. And along my path, I got very interested in storytelling and how different cultures in the world and how mythologies work, and started studying a lot more about that, and went to great lengths to learn more about that sort of thing. Because the stories we tell today are really no different than the stories that the Greeks were telling, than other cultures were telling over time. They have similar themes and similar components to them. And so, storytelling has a very universal quality. And I think that's why we're all drawn to going to the cinema, to see movies, to watch television, to embrace these stories, even when they're not from our own culture.
Hmm.
That's what's always fascinated me.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great story you're telling, and it really is also a part of filmmaking history, because you know, from those early days and the vision that you had and some of your friends had, to the fact that you were able to, many years later, of course, but still do the first beautiful 3D animated movie that was ever made. Fantastic achievement, and I think it's very inspiring to hear how you, as a young kid, really started, had a vision, and
Yeah.
kind of never gave up on it. And I think that that is a key for anyone entering the space of let's say visual storytelling. It is not easy. It's a struggle, and there are many ups and downs, and but we're still in here.
Yeah.
And
And in fact, you know, I mentioned that when I was in New York, we thought we'd make it the first computer animated feature back in we'd have it done by 1985. Well, we were off. We were wrong by 10 years, you know, but we stuck with the vision. And really what brought us all together when we formed PIXAR and when we started working on this film was that we shared this vision of making this kind of film that we had wanted to do for a long time. So when I say that the film took 4 years to make, I'm lying, because really this was the team of people I started working with, you know, 15 years earlier, that we stuck together, we kept at it. And then finally, when we got the approval to do it, then we started the 4-year journey to make that film. But we had spent many years beforehand working together as a team, making short films together that helped us hone our storytelling skills, then making television commercials to, you know, we started making television commercials because we felt if we could tell a good story in 30 seconds, as you have to do on US television, then, you know, making a 75 or 80-minute movie would certainly be difficult, but at least the story side of it, we could really get a handle on. So that was a big part of it for us.
exactly. Now, Hollywood, to many people outside Hollywood and even people in Hollywood, seems like a fortress you cannot penetrate. It is like, you know, for talented people, so many frustrated, you know, boys and girls sitting in coffee shops and looking up at the big towers and never really getting on the inside, even if they may be super talented. And then you think rest of the world, you know, is kind of traditionally have looked at Hollywood as the, you know, the beacon, you know, where everything is created and so forth and so on. Now we have a technological revolution, you know, at our doorstep, right? It's actually inside. And indeed, the class here, you know, that is just about to start is embarking on a journey, right? Where traditional storytelling can merge with very cutting edge technologies like augmented reality filmmaking and stuff like that, that really changes to some extent the balance, if you like, between who can actually realize talent, you know, these days, as opposed to, you know, a generation or two ago. How do you see the new technologies helping talented people realize their dreams in maybe
Sure,
new
sure.
ways?
So, you know, it's funny because I left Pixar in 1997, specifically because in the years that we made Toy Story, this thing called the internet really became available to everybody around the world. The first web browsers were developed, and other things really made the internet a possibility. And I went to work for Electronic Arts, a video game company that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And at Electronic Arts, we developed a game that was an internet-based game in which a story was told using the various, for lack of a better word, the various media of the internet. In other words, when you embarked on this game, you received emails, text messages, phone calls, video clips. You were taken to websites that were part of the story of this game. And it was a multiple media game, I guess, for lack of a better word. And it was taking us into the world that I would call transmedia, which is telling stories across a variety of different types of media. And it was a fascinating process because we would write the script for an episode of our story. And then the process was not about breaking it down as we would in animation into different shots. We were breaking it down into different media pieces that could be used to communicate the story. And so we'd say, well, this particular scene or this little bit of information might best be told in an email to the player. This one would be a video clip that we would send. This one would be perhaps a phone call that would be made to the player. And the game was about government conspiracies. And so there was a lot of spooky thriller qualities to it. And so you would get a phone call from a character in the game, relaying a message to you, who might tell you to go to a website. And when you got to the website, it would trigger an instant message conversation with someone who said they were a player in the game, but there was something odd about them because they were in fact a bot. And the bot had been trained to carry on conversations with players. And so we took people through these various steps in the story using these different techniques. Augmented reality now is a tremendous tool because it lets us merge stories into our real world in ways that have not been considered before. People claim that Pokemon Go is augmented reality. I'm not sure it really is. I think it's just a way of layering a character onto the real world, which is interesting, and it's certainly a step in that direction. But what about games that can really, or experiences that really merge with the world we live in? To me, that's fascinating, and it's one of the reasons why I went to work at Electronic Arts at that time. I'm not really much of a gamer, so it was a little bit out of my normal domain to be working there. But it was a fascinating time, and I loved working on projects like that. And I think that's really where the future of storytelling is how can we engage people in their everyday lives in this great little device that so many of us carry in our pockets these days, and engage them in storytelling. People love stories. There's no question about it. Mm-hmm. And if I only say to you, let me tell you something. Once upon a time, and I start that way, your mind immediately relaxes and lets me in to help give you an image, to give you a story, to tell you something that might not be in part of your reality or might not be in part of the reality of other people, and yet you open yourself up to it. I think as humans, we are naturally given to want to have experiences that are more like metaphors, if you will, experiences that take us into a realm where we can see something like our lives, but isn't exactly our lives. And that to me is the most interesting part of storytelling.
Absolutely. And I think, thank you for sharing that, Ralph. And I think maybe that could lead over to you, Gareth. Perhaps you have some questions, or any of the participants may have some questions or comments. Please feel free, right? And we could have a little discussion.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. You're muted because of this echo thing, but
we'll live with it.
Yeah.
As we were learning today, first of all, thank you, Ralph, and for such an insightful and wonderful landscape of your contribution to global storytelling. We have been trialing over this last week different mediums. We had some Norwegian singers, thanks to the PIXAR platform and the Bollerings app, out in the heat of a almost 40-degree day here in the desert. But in terms of these wonderful stories that you've shared, one of the themes throughout this course is very much about finding our own voice as storytellers. And with the world's oldest storytelling culture, with representatives right here in the room, one of the questions that I have is really, given the new frontiers that both of you have embraced in your careers, can you talk a little bit about your personal voice, your voice of identity, and how you have followed your story into the unknown?
Ralph?
Well, so I am not a director or an animator. I'm a producer. And in my role as a producer, what I do is I work with directors to help them tell the story they want to tell. So I'm there to help them realize a dream or a vision that they have for a story. That's really my job. And I will claim that I don't have a personal story burning in me that I need to make into a film, but I have worked with people who are tremendously talented, who I recognize as having that vision. And I appreciate the opportunity to work with them. And they also, as storytellers, they need someone to enable them to help ground their idea in reality and make it possible. And that's what I do. I live in the realm of the possible and the art of the possible of making things happen. But, I agree with you. Australia has the oldest storytelling culture in the world. And it's surprising when I see that, we talk about Hollywood, but Hollywood's film industry is very small compared to Bollywood in India or Nollywood in Nigeria, countries that we don't think of in the United States, at least, I have to admit, as having huge film industries, yet they're much bigger than the US film industry. So there's no reason why other countries aren't expressing their stories and aren't telling their stories in a similar way.
Yeah. And on my part, what I'm really fascinated by is the tool sets that are available now, right? That can actually make people realize their dreams and telling their story without being in this endless maze of promises of money and things will happen next year and that kind of thing. I think the fact of the matter is that now talented people, wherever they are in the world, whether it's Norway or Alice Springs or San Francisco for that matter, can actually come together and realize dreams, visually speaking, in a completely new way. And I found this very fascinating of how we, for example, also in Picture Tell, have been collaborating, let's say Gareth and our team here up north on, for example, the Bombing of Darwin project and others, where we literally have people from around the world doing different scenes, voices, characters, animation, and putting the whole thing together in a really compelling tour. In that case, about the Japanese attack on Darwin in 19th of September 1942. So this opens up fantastic opportunities that I'm very excited to be a part of as we go also into the beginning of the new year together with you.
No, thank you, Hawk, and thank you, Ralph. Because we both watched the trailers for your films, and we'll no doubt be studying them more in depth in the beginning of the next year. Actually, Tony, you, in fact, everyone here has watched Toy Story, correct? And everyone enjoyed Toy Story?
Yeah.
There was lots of positive responses at the beginning of this morning too. We shared a couple of things and themes there, and Tony, I think you've got a genuine interest in animation.
Yeah. I grew up on Disney and Pixar, so I'm a 90s baby. Really watched Disney change into Pixar and was really great at it. So it created a love for wanting to create in the future an animation of my own, retelling stories of my people and the stories that I've grown up on from my elders, to give back to generations under me, to give back to anyone really that has interest in storytelling. But I just wanted to know that when you're creating story or you're focusing on wanting to develop storytelling, what are the important things that you focus on when creating a storyboard?
Well, let's not worry about the storyboarding itself. It's at first. The first thing that one needs is an idea, a dilemma, a conflict, something that could help drive a story.
Yeah.
And then from that, you start thinking about visually. The beauty of working in animation, what I've always been intrigued with in animation, is nothing in animation is ever real, right? Yeah. Everything has to be created entirely to create a world, and that world will have its own rules. It'll have its own physics. It will have its own qualities of light and shadow that don't necessarily resemble our world, but remind us of our world. Yeah. So as you start thinking about the story, you start thinking about how you might visually depict the story. And we would literally look through children's books and look at the illustrations and the illustrators to get ideas of how we might represent Toy Story even. And the first people we hired to work on the film were illustrators and we'd say, oh, well, here's some characters we're thinking of. How, we'll describe them to you verbally. And why don't you come back in a few days with some drawings of what they would look like, right? And that's how we developed the ideas for what Buzz and Woody would look like in the film. And then as we started accumulating that, then we would start storyboarding maybe some key moments in the film of what they might look like. But if you go online, you can see a test that we did for Disney with early versions of Buzz and Woody who don't look at all like Buzz and Woody. One is a guy in a red spacesuit that became Buzz Lightyear later on, very short guy. And the other one is kind of a cowboy, but he's a ventriloquist dummy with a jaw that slides up and down. And it was a little 30-second test we did to show Disney what could be done. But we then evolved way beyond that and how the characters look. And so we would start thinking visually, and then we would start thinking about how the story would evolve. We would write down some scenes, then we would storyboard a scene, and we would rewrite the same scene, and we would redraw the same scene several times to really get it to where we want it to mean something. And so it wasn't, I mean, we had a script that went through, yes, we hired writers ultimately who wrote the entire script. But the process of animation is very iterative. It's like peeling an onion. You go through layer after layer to finally get to the heart of the story. I'll explain one thing that might help you. We ultimately, every good story has some sort of theme to it, some deeper meaning that. And I would ask you, what do you think the theme of Toy Story is? What is Toy Story really trying to talk about?
We talked about this morning. What else want to share?
I think finding friendship and overcoming differences.
So it took us 2.5 of the 4 years working on the film before we realized that's what our film was really about. So we knew it was sort of about that, but we hadn't really figured it out. Instead, we were looking at other films that we call buddy pictures. Two characters who get together who can't stand each other. I'm trying to think of something recently like that, but other classic ones are Thelma and Louise or 48 Hours with Eddie Murphy. I can't say I've seen anything recently like that, but I'm sure there are. So, we thought of it as a buddy picture, and we were making our own version of a buddy picture with these two characters. But the idea of friendship didn't really quite strike us, even though the idea of a buddy picture is the two characters can't get along, but ultimately they find a way to work together.
Yeah.
And then finally, when we sat down with Randy Newman, we could say to him, this film is really about friendship. Could you write a good song about friendship? And that's where You've Got a Friend in Me came from. But it was only after we realized what this film was really all about. It took us some time.
Interesting.
Wonderful. Barry, you also had some thoughts, and I'll share them if you wish. But also about nostalgia and the power of our imagination as children, and sort of that sense of sometimes giving up on that. And we've been talking about the importance of really ensuring that we keep that alive, our sense of imagination alive. But
Yes.
that's something Barry offered.
Yeah, absolutely. And the primarily the animators, especially who I work with, always have a sort of childlike delight in the work that they do. And John Lasseter, who directed Toy Story, who directed Cars, a lot of his films are really about thinking back to his childhood and the things that amused him as a child. And toys were one of those things. Cars were another one of those things. His father worked for a car dealership, and so cars were a big part of his life. And it goes on and on. I mean, you take things from your own experience, and you try to tell that story in a way that will engage others. What you will find very often is, as much as Toy Story might be really a film about life in the United States, even in Alice Springs, people are watching Toy Story and getting a thrill out of it. And even though it feels like it may be from something of a different culture, because being very specific about, and we talk about this a lot, the more specific you are about your story, the more universal the story becomes. That seems kind of odd, right? That one would focus so much on telling a story about life in suburban America that would have appeal around the world, that would attract audiences around the world. But because it's an authentic view of that life, people really resonate with it and people are drawn to it.
Mhm. I think that's a great point. Yes, please.
Oh, no, just saying thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to ask a question of these kind gentlemen? One question I have, just to gauge an interest, we're very lucky to have an international perspective involved in this project, and certainly to have you here today. And from that, Hawke obviously there at the top of the North Pole in Europe, and then across to the other side of this beautiful globe of ours, over there in the States. What do you think the international appetite would be to hear First Nations stories, those of the oldest living culture? Do you think that there's a real possibility to find an international audience with those stories?
Ralph?
So, back in the 1970s or 80s, there was a burgeoning Australian film industry. Suddenly Australia was on the map, and Hollywood was very aware of Australia because there were stories coming from Australia, not Aboriginal stories, but some were, but stories from Australia that were really catching people's attention. And there's no reason why, in fact, it's a shame that more stories from this long storytelling history of Aboriginal storytelling have not made it to the world scene, because there are specific elements of the stories that that would have tremendous appeal around the world for exactly the same reasons that Toy Story would be attractive to people in Australia. And it's about finding the common themes that, like, we were talking about the theme of friendship, the common themes that exist everywhere on our planet that people react to. Right now in the United States, it's interesting you mentioned First Nations, because in the United States, there's a sudden interest in First Nation stories about the Native Americans here. And there's a very popular television show right now called Reservation Dogs that is all about a bunch of teenagers growing up on a reservation here in the United States. It just finished its third season and been very successful. And now one of our major feature films is The Killers of the Flower Moon, directed by Martin Scorsese, but the story is about the 1920s on the Osage Indian Reservation in Oklahoma. So these stories have great resonance, and they come out of all kinds of cultures. There are stories inside you that people want to hear and want to see, and it's really about finding a way to express them as best you can.
Yeah, I completely concur. And just to share a little bit from top of the world, in northern Norway, we have a First Nations nation, even with its own parliament and own language, and we're very proud of that. And Norway was, together with maybe Sweden, a couple of other of the northern countries here, early on realizing the importance of and the heritage of this storytelling from mother to daughter, from father to son, both in terms of songs and in terms of typical stories, that has survived for not just hundreds of years, but thousands of years. And I think that the same way Ralph mentioned the Greek tradition, there is, of course, also the First Nations tradition. And it's also fascinating how there are connections between First Nation stories. In Norway, you've been around for 40,000 years. The First Nation in Norway is about 10,000 years old. So it's relatively young compared to what you have to offer. But I think that the fact of the matter is, as Ralph is also pointing out here, we all carry stories inside of us, right? And it's a part of being human to be able to share those stories with others. And what a fantastic opportunity that's going ahead of us now with new technology, right? That is democratization of the production itself. I think personally, I love the fact that we can now together across nations, across borders, and across cultures, collaborate in creating and sharing great storytelling and stories. So yeah, Ralph, any final thought from your end?
No, I think that's absolutely correct. I think new technologies, just as I was drawn to the project at Electronic Arts, new technologies offer new ways of telling stories. I left, people asked me why I was leaving Pixar. It seemed crazy because it's such a great place to work. But we were not telling stories using new technology in and of itself. We were using a technology to make films that would be shown in theaters in a very conventional way. But we were not really embracing technology as a way to tell the story. And I think today you can do that with augmented reality, with other techniques. And now I look at the advent of artificial intelligence into the scene. And I'm very excited about the storytelling opportunities that creates, because I think there's a whole new realm of opportunity there.
And to just round it all up here, when you started and shared your story, Ralph, about your early days in New York, right? So you were always fascinated by films, and you saw techniques and technology as a means to ultimately tell stories, right? And I think that's the absolute approach that we as creators, storytellers, should take. Not be blinded by technology, but with our stories, using whatever means are out there to enable that to happen, and never give up, right?
I'll tell you a funny bit about that, which is after I left Pixar, I encountered many people. San Francisco is right near Silicon Valley, which is a big technology center, of course. And I would meet people from time to time where they would be introduced to me, and they would say, I come from, and they would name a country where they were from. And they would say, we want to create the next Pixar in our country. And I would say to them, well, that's great. What makes it possible for you to do this in your country? And they would say, well, we have great technology. And I would say, well, unfortunately, you've missed the point. What makes Pixar a great company is not the technology. The technology is just a much more sophisticated pencil that our animators can use to draw with. What makes Pixar a successful company is its ability to tell interesting stories in ways that people haven't thought of before. And the technology we use makes for pretty pictures, and it makes it much more interesting. I'm not saying it's not valuable, but that's not the essence of it. Let me put it another way. When we started making Toy Story, we realized that the technology, remember, Toy Story is now 27 years old. So when we started making the film, we realized we're working with computers. We knew that every 2 years, computers double in speed, right? And the software gets more sophisticated. We couldn't possibly make a film of the visual quality that would really make a difference 25, 50 years from now. But then we thought to ourselves, people are still watching Snow White, which Walt Disney made in 1939, right? Snow White is now almost 90 years old, and people are still watching it. They're not watching it because the animation is the most beautiful they've ever seen, although it's extremely good. They're watching it because they're drawn to the story and the characters. And so we figured when we make Toy Story, yes, we're going to push ourselves to make it look as beautiful as we can, but the most important thing always is the story. And as long as the story is interesting, people will not even notice the little imperfections, or they won't go like, gee, this could be, this would look so much better today than it was then. Nobody has ever said that. What they talk about is how much they love the characters.
I think that's a fantastic way to maybe end this session. Gareth, any final thoughts from your end?
It's just gratitude and thanks for taking the time and interest in our First Nation storytellers. The world wants to hear your stories. We're hoping to find a pathway, and we're looking forward to working with you further on that journey. So thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good to see you.
Thanks. And thanks, Ralph.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.